We have another question about the problem with greens, and this one is, this person has been struggling with greens and backgrounds, saying that she or he has been mixing with grays to create the feeling of background trees, but doesn't look realistic. Can you give us tips on how to create the greens to be used for those far away trees and bushes? I'll go a little bit deeper than that. Well, the whole question of mixing greens baffles so many people. So I'm going to start back a little bit further, or you might say background work before how you mix greens to show distance. And that is mixing greens as a general principle. A lot of people advocate mixing your greens by using blues and yellows. Others advocate other methods of mixing greens. I just want to show you some characteristics to consider, because in order to mix greens to show trees in the distance, you have to start out with a green that is the green you're seeing, the green of the overall scene, and that can be determined by whether it's by many things: time of year, where the sunlight is, and all sorts of things like that. So let's just address the problem of greens to begin with. Now, I have two greens, two pigments that come out of the tube that call themselves green. Well, one calls itself viridian. But I want to show you the relationship of these colors and then how you might move in mixing them to begin with the green, and then what you might do with that. So what I want to show you, first of all, ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue, we have two blues. Now, there are many blues. But if you start out with, when you're mixing for any color, especially green, if you'll start your mixture with a green or blue or green, whatever you decide to use, that is the darkest, is really dark coming out of the tube, you have then the ability to get those really dark colors. So let's start with ultramarine blue. Will it make a good green? Let me show you first of all just the characteristic of ultramarine blue. I'm going to do that by making a very thin version of it here, so that you can see the hue of ultramarine blue. And I'm just rubbing that into the canvas. If I put it on thick, you'll see right here, it's obvious. If you put it on thick, you really can't see that characteristics. So a lot of people will reach for ultramarine blue and yellow without thinking of other options. Now, for the really dark colors, another option is the phthalo blue. Now let me show you the difference between those two. I think I show you that somewhere else too, but not in this context. So here is the difference. Now, see, if I put that on really thinly like that, I've got it darker at the top there so you can see the difference. You see, there is a real difference in those two colors. This one now we feel leans a little bit more towards red, and this one we feel leans a little bit more towards yellow. So when you're creating greens, that has to be taken into consideration if you're beginning with blues. Other options, now there is the sap green that a lot of companies mix. That is one that a lot of people like to start out with, and it's a really good one to start out with, but I'm not going to show you that one. I'm going to show you the ones that might not be likely options, but where you might start and get more flexibility. So phthalo green, not phthalo blue, phthalo green has this characteristic. Let me start it really dark, and you can see it leans more, it's a bluish green, but it's very strong in tinting strength, which means that you have to be careful about the amount of phthalo green you use in your mixtures, or else it will just dominate everything. It has other characteristics too. There is a substitute for that that I've found and that I use on a regular basis, and that is, and you have to be careful here because the color viridian is different among manufacturers. Now this is the viridian that's made by Rembrandt. It's called Rembrandt viridian, but it has that characteristic, you can see on the palette there, of being transparent and dark. And let me show you how similar it is to phthalo green. So this is why I've chosen the Viridian. You see, I put that down, and you see those are very, very similar. Very similar in hue. The Viridian tends to be perhaps just a little bit bluer. Now, here are options that we can start from, but now I want to show you what happens if you do the obvious. The obvious would be to get this green, to maybe mix yellow into it. And in fact, a lot of people say that if you start out with blue, you would mix yellow into it. Now let me show you the obvious here. And that is when you mix yellow into it. And then I'll show you where we can go from there. So I'll start out with ultramarine blue. I'll just pull a bit of ultramarine blue here on the palette. And I'm just going to use the Hansa Yellow Light here to show you comparison of yellow. A cadmium yellow light would work well with this too. The character of the green that you would get. Now there is a very, very dark version. Let's put a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Light into it. And make a middle value version to give you a comparison there. So you can see there, but that feels a little bit more like a dull green. Usable perhaps in some cases, but it's a good thing, not you need, it's a good thing to know the difference. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull Hansa Yellow Light over and use phthalo blue. Now I want you to notice the difference between phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. Now when I mixed the Hansa Yellow Light into it, now, I had to go very, very carefully, and you can see just about the same amount of Hansa Yellow Light with phthalo blue, and it gets still very, very blue-green. That's because the phthalo blue is so strong. It too has a very strong tinting strength. But then you see, when I get it about that same value as we have right here, look at the difference in the greens. The difference between what ultramarine blue mixed with the same yellow as phthalo blue gives you these two different greens. All right, now I'm going to go another step and show you about the same mixture with phthalo green and with Viridian. Now I have to go very carefully with phthalo green because it is, again, such a strong tinting strength. But I'll show you the character of the green that you get if you just add yellow into phthalo green. And this is very close to the character that you'll get. Not a natural green, but you can see how that might end up making more of what we think of as a Christmas green. Now I'm going to use do the same thing with Viridian, and because Viridian is such a not nearly the tinting strength, it's very similar in hue and character, but it's not the same tinting strength. And so I need to use more of the Viridian into the mixture, and you can see what I come up with here. I'll just put them side by side like this, and you can see very similar. So we get, in hue-wise, we get a very similar mixture when we mix the Hansa Yellow into the phthalo green and Viridian. We get, you see how similar it also is to the phthalo blue with the yellow, but you see how different it is with the ultramarine blue. So the point there is, don't start out with the obvious. So how would we start? Now, if we were to start with this mixture, ultramarine blue and yellow, Hansa Yellow Light or cadmium yellow light, either one, or another yellow. If we start out with that, we're going to start with a blue that is relatively low in intensity already. There is another way around where we can have more control, and I want to show you that as a beginning. Then I'm going to show you how you might manage that for distant trees. So I'm going to go with my Rembrandt Viridian to show you that you could do a similar thing with phthalo green. Doesn't quite work so well with phthalo blue, but this is a combination I recommend to get started with, because I think if you start with the right combination and work out from there, you have a lot more flexibility than if you just search around and try to use different mixtures, blues and greens and so on. You might get out of color harmony. So this will also enable color harmony. I found that the Rembrandt transparent oxide red mixed, and the proportions matter, but mixed in a proportion about maybe 1 to 3 with Viridian will give us a green, a yellow green. In fact, the characteristic of the transparent oxide red changes the temperature from cool, the Viridian's already a cool temperature, as compared, you can see cooler here as compared to well, no, I don't have it here, as compared to the yellow green, it's a cooler temperature. So we can change that temperature to make it warmer by adding the transparent oxide red into it. If you add too much transparent oxide red, it totally neutralizes it. Now let's see what we have here, and we can come up with a mixture that we can start out with. So I'm going to brush here. I'm going to start, let's just draw a line here because we're doing something different. Now this is that original proportion of the transparent transparent oxide red mixed into Viridian. You would get a similar green as this. You see how very neutralized that is. You get a similar green mixed with that if you use the phthalo green. Now I'm going to add more of the Viridian to it and let you watch what can happen, just as a starting point. So the proportion matters. Now I've had a lot of people that will use this mixture, but the proportions get closer to what I'm having here, and the greens will turn out really, really dull. So when I change the proportion, then I can get a color that is leaning a little bit more towards what we're reading here as the summer green. So we put this right here, and you can see as I thin that down, you can see now that begins to look, if you compare visually these with this and that, you'll see that would not be a bad place to start. Now, when you're raising the value for that, for the trees that are up close, what we need to do is to raise the value as well as raise the temperature, because as the sun is shining, where the sun is shining on the foliage, the temperature is warmer. So we raise the temperature. Now, to raise the temperature, we would reach first of all for the yellow. So I'll just put this right here. And as we're going up, for the ones up close, as we're going up in temperature, we can, just by adding yellow to that mixture, we can come up with something like this. And you can see, if I hold that to this photograph, you can see how that's very, very close to the yellow we're looking at there. Here, well, it's similar, and here, similar. So I've got 3 different scenes here. All of them are in direct light, and all of them have trees up close and trees in the distance. Now I'm going to take that one step further. This is just showing you a way to go and a way to think. It needs to be the colors, the color combinations, where the trees are closer to us, the color combinations are warmer. We'll see them as warmer. And so to where the light is shining brighter, stronger on those, then we will add in the yellow range to get them warmer, even as it comes up in value, to continue to get it warmer. And then when it gets really, really light, only then can we begin to add white and get that contrast. Now, so I'll just begin to add a little bit of white to it now and show you what I'm talking about there. Now you see, with the yellow in it, adding the yellow to this as we raise the value, rather than just raise the value with white, as we add the yellow to it, that yellow stays in there, so that when we add white to it, we get that nice bright yellow. Now I've shown you that principle in another quick tip, how you can retain the brilliance of the warmth in a green by adding the yellow first and then adding the white. But what about those trees in the distance? The trees in the distance can be handled one of two ways. And when the trees are in the distance like we see them there, you can skip the yellow. And that's one good way to do it. Now, if they're really in the distance, then begin to turn blue. That's something totally different. But when they're just in the immediate distance here, and even the ones on the hills over there, when the atmosphere is not thick and the colors haven't changed to blue already, you can see the difference. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start out again with this mixture, and just right here, and we're going to interpret what we would see right here. So I'll start right here, and this is a little bit darker than it needs to be. So I'll start right there, and I'm going to add, let me pull this down so I can distinguish for you the difference in how you might handle that. I'm going to add just a little bit of white. Now you see what white does to green is it cools it. No matter the yellow greens, even if it's sap green, and even when I add the yellow back in here, white cools it. It also, when it raises the value, it cools it. Now you can see that right here. See how that is so much cooler. And if I add more white without the yellow, add more white, it cools it even more. And also by it cooling it, the white also, because it's a neutral color, it slightly reduces the intensity. So if you, rather than use grays and things like that, if you simply add white without the yellow, you can interpret those in the distance. Now, if this is too cool, actually it does feel a little too cool for this, it might work a little bit better for these right back in here. Then you can add a little bit more yellow back in, not very much, just a little bit more yellow back in to the green, and see, you have something like that. So rather than to reach for blue, which might feel like the obvious thing to do if you're trying to make something cooler, you have that option of skipping the yellow. In other words, you're pulling the yellow out of the green. Starting out with the green, well, you could start out with sap green, and this principle will work the same way. Just give it a try, you'll see what I'm talking about. Controlling the amount of yellow that's in the green as it moves into the distance is going to help that to feel more like it's in the distance, because there is atmosphere created by particles in the air. The color of the sky is reflecting into those particles and causing us to see trees in the distance as just a little bit cooler. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.